place is nowhere. And it's forever. Ghosts of my life.
Exciting jaunt is yet another chapter in this, the 2000s British Electronica podcast.
We're here again. I'm Steven, and this is
Marlowe.
And we are here as your hosts for Lost Futures, a Mark Fisher podcast. We're here today to talk about The Caretaker.
Yep.
And a very exciting ambient musician who was pretty close to Mark Fisher, so...
Yeah, they actually were friends, as told by the first chapter that we're going to get into, which is literal liner notes that Mark wrote.
Yeah, the
Caretaker's album.
Yeah, the first essay is actually the sleeve notes, what you just heard. The 2005 Theoretically Pure Antigrade Amnesia, his fourth album. Yeah, fourth album. 1, 2, 3. Fifth album. And it's like 3 hours and 42 minutes long.
Yeah, it was released as a 6-album box set, there were 6 discs.
It feels like 6 hours long. It could be. I think he has another album that's 6 hours, and then another one that's 9 hours. Those are his later albums.
Yeah, he's a real cool guy, real artsy type.
Yeah, and they're all ambient, but the thesis for his project is he's the caretaker, which is a reference to...
The Shining.
The Shining, the wonderful 1980 movie. We watched it in preparation for this.
Basis for one of the best Simpsons Halloween special shorts called The Shining.
Yeah, it's a classic. Everyone knows it. Here Comes Johnny. Next week we'll have a full episode on Mark Fisher discussing just the movie. But first he talks about this artist, which makes this album. And the thesis of this artist is he's making music that would theoretically be played.
Well, that was just one of his album concepts. That was a previous album of his.
Selected Memories from the Haunted Ballroom.
Yeah, they all have very long names.
Which was his first album in 1999. And the idea is that these are all songs that would be played in the ballroom in The Shining.
And this one, the name comes from the idea of anterograde amnesia, also known as the thing from Memento, that of essentially, because you can't form new memories, you can only live in the past. And the basic idea is, in theory, these past memories just get preserved as your semblance of the present. In fact, they also fade over time, as old memories do. So the theoretically pure anterograde amnesia is this idea of this perfect encapsulation of the past forming your basis of being. Basically, he made a hauntology album. Mark Fisher wrote the liner notes for it, and here we are.
And this is the section of the chapter in the book for hauntology, and that's why it's included here after The Burial, which he also considers to be a music genre of
Anyway, this album consists, as we said, of 6 discs. No song titles. They're all just...
They're labeled Memory 1 through 66 or something.
Yeah, so that's what it is that this man made.
Oh, and I was wrong. It's 72 tracks, not 66 tracks.
Okay.
He makes the distinction between antigrade and retrograde amnesia.
Right, I mean, retrograde amnesia is the classic 60s sitcom, you get hit on the head. Who am I? Where am I? What's my name? Who are you people? That's retrograde amnesia. You forget all the memories up to that point, but form new memories. Anterograde amnesia, you can't form new memories, but you remember everything up to that point.
Yeah, and do you know the man who mistook his wife for a hat?
Yeah, that's a classic Oliver Sacks book. It put Oliver Sacks on the map as far as a popular intellectual goes. Oliver Sacks is probably more well known today because of Awakenings, the movie. Oliver Sacks was involved in an experiment. There was like this weird fucking disease that just put people in an eternal coma. And they've been in it for like 30 years or some shit. Mm-hmm. And Oliver Sacks was part of a team that came up with an idea of giving them a drug that literally in some horrible dystopian tragedy, like sci-fi bullshit, like let them be alive for like 2 weeks and then they all slip back into it again.
Jesus.
I'd have to look up the details, but that is the broad strokes of what happened. They made a movie about it. I think De Niro's in it. But that's like another thing Oliver Sacks is known for. He was on Radiolab a bunch before he died. He's one of those like dudes that NPR people read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and like to talk about Oliver Sacks.
I mean, I read it in college. I think it was something that was given out as like a short.
Far as like popular shrinks go, he's better than several. Better than Peterson or Gladwell, I guess.
So then he gets into the album. The theme is a homesickness for the past in his previous albums, but now it's an impossibility of the present. Which is...
Yeah, that was a good quote. He's saying essentially that this album is hauntological and seems to be the thesis. I try and approach everything with a removed and intellectual gaze and an open mind. Music didn't really do it for me, and also I didn't listen to 74 fucking songs. So can't really complain, but I mean, I don't know, it's spooky and dour, like a lot of the music that Mark likes.
Like The Shining.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm trying to appreciate this slightly more.
Because he does mention that it's the reference of the invention of moral, which is influenced by last year, the Marienbad, and therefore also on The Shining. And in all these movies, they seem to imagine a world we live in. Imagined a world we live in it, where the specters of the beautiful and the damned are preserved forever. Their little gestures and banal conversations transformed by repetition into holy artifacts. That does kind of sum up The Shining, and he's kind of making the link to the music, where it seems like the music is preserved in something that you can't quite remember. Like, I can't quite remember anything about the music unless it's on.
Okay, so this essay or sleeve notes or liner notes, whatever you want to call it, kind of goes into a very poetical voice, I'd say, where it very much is trying to itself convey a feeling of confusion and out of placeness and out of timeness, like he's arguing the album does.
Well, I think he's also just trying to honor it. Like, he's trying to honor the music in a way that reflects the music.
Also these are sleeve notes. I mean, having a poetic voice in sleeve notes is a perfectly reasonable thing that has been done in many sleeve notes, because they kind of expect you to be, sort of listening to the full album and sitting back on your couch and reading
the sleeve notes.
Yeah, reading your sleeve notes, which are all big and shit because you got a vinyl record and it's 1974 or whatever.
He kind of slips in and out of this poetic voice.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, overall I would say like this, as far as, this is a collection of different essays from different places, and as far as that goes, they do often speak in sort of different voices and try to do different things. And this one, yeah, as I think you said, flare.
Flowery.
Flowery.
Very flowery.
Yeah.
The gold room in which the Scott Fitzgerald era elite forever cavort in a ceaseless whirl of wit, cocaine, and wealth is perfectly heavenly. But you know what the price of the ticket to heaven is, don't you, Jack? Don't you?
It's your soul.
So he kind of slips in and out of like quoting the movie and also talking about the album in a way that I'd say reflects the dour mood of the music. I personally enjoy the music as far as something to put on if you're like at work and you're at a computer for a long period of time and you just want to zone out for something. I think it's really good for that.
To that, and then the quote I was looking for, why is it always raining in here? Or is that just the sound of the television tuned to a dead channel? Where are we? Which also I find interesting because his previous Burial, that also he liked to use rain imagery.
Yeah, especially about London when he was talking about
I mean, a lot of the bands he listens to, there seems to be a aqueous theme.
A happy theme.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is the dour, sad electronic artist who makes gloomy rain music.
Which Burial also was.
Right, but this is the one who likes The Shining.
This is the one that named himself after The Shining.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas Burial likes England or something.
Well, this also has, we'll get into it for the next section, but similar to Burial, this is also mourning the idea of the rave.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, yeah, I guess teasing a little bit, but I would say there was a very England-focused theme with Burial, like, and with Tricky. I mean, just, and especially with Tricky, like with the putting him in the place of that time when Britpop existed as well, and working through that. And this one, yeah, I would say
Joy Division also.
Well, yeah, yes.
Joy Division also.
Yeah, well, anything before 1990, yeah. This one, yeah, I feel like that's not brought up as much, I guess.
The other thing I want to talk about, he talks about the crackle in this again. He talks about the threat is no longer the deadly, sweet seduction of nostalgia. And I thought that was interesting because they oftentimes got accused of being very nostalgic. The hauntology is often conflated with nostalgia.
Right. Well, this one also, I feel like he more stridently dismisses it and kind of talks about other stuff.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it said the problem is not anymore the longing to get to the past, but the inability to get out of it.
He also talks about memory a lot with it in here too, because that's linked with getting out of the past in the context of here is creating new memories and stuff like that. That requires a link to the past. And here it says, like, in this section, we were in the simulation of another mind's eye. The mottled, honeyed, slurred, and reverbed quality of the sound alerted us to the fact that this was not the object itself, but the object as it is for someone else's memory. And to me, that had it's even further distanced from this idea of, oh, we're nostalgic about our past or a past. Yeah, I like the poetic language. I think that it gives a nice break almost from the...
If this was like a grunge album in 1991, it'd be like, hey losers, this is our stupid music. You're dumb for listening to it. Enjoy, from Kurt and the guys.
Yeah, it does have
it has a very much... Yeah, it's an artsy cultural theorist guy friend that he has writing his fucking liner notes for some stone dude to presumably be reading on the couch because we all listen to albums that way.
Okay, we looked it up about the Beckett landscape for anybody who's reading along at home and doesn't know what a Beckett landscape is.
We get that it's sad, but frankly, I just read a sentence in Wikipedia.
Well, Samuel Beckett is the...
They don't need to be told who Samuel Beckett is. We should be embarrassed for having to look him up.
Yeah, I mean, all you have to know is he's late modernist, known for his dour settings, and he makes a big deal about...
The Beckett landscape. I don't know. He's using it the way you'd use Dickensian, but, like, it obviously means something else. Seemingly negative, I guess. I don't know. I don't know any Beckett. Sorry,
but he makes it specifically about landmarks. Like, there are a few landmarks. You know, in the album, there's no names of the tracks. They just have memory 1, memory 2, memory 3. You don't have anything going along, and it kind of puts you into this hazy, foggy space. Yeah, I'm just
saying, if I was listening to a podcast and I had these two guys going, yeah, it says Dickensian. I guess it means, like, Victorian and, like, poor people or something. I'd be like, what the fuck, guys? So I'm just apologizing to the listener.
And he says, you extemporize stories, they call it confabulations, to make sense of the abstract shapes looming in the smoke and fog. I thought about what you said about the Silent Hill reference that he talks about.
Yeah.
The fog that kind of like... What was it that you said?
Distance fog is what it's called.
Distance fog, where that allows for the game itself to...
run properly. It allows it to essentially load images without rendering them in a way that lets it run on worse hardware.
But when you listen to, like, you know, the Caretaker, it's really hard not to hear the fogginess that he creates with the... I think that
is an interesting idea of, like, this was an artifact of how they made games in the 90s and 2000s, and I don't think there's been so much a retro move other than it being an option to turn on if your computer's shitty, but I don't think there's really been a retro move to bring distance fog back in some, like, indie experimental game. It'd be an interesting idea, though.
Yeah,
like, in the same way of the crackle and whatnot from music.
At the end here, he gets, as you said, poetic. A few haunting refrains lingering in the back of your mind separates you from the desert of the real, which is like a Matrix line, but it's also a Jean Baudrillard, and the Matrix took it from Baudrillard.
And Baudrillard really appreciated that and said, wow, this is such a great representation of my work.
Yeah, well,
Baudrillard said the opposite.
Yeah,
of that
for those that Marlowe's being sarcastic, Baudrillard did not like the Matrix and did not like being referenced in the Matrix, and thought that it was Plato's Cave, and he was not doing Plato's Cave.
Yeah, no, his thing was totally different than Plato's Cave.
And so he says,
your fault for confusing it. I mean, the Wachowskis famously did make the cast read Simulation and Simulacra.
Yeah, Simulations and Simulacra. Yeah. Then we get into the last
Desert
part.
Of the real, baby.
Then we get into the last part, which is interesting because it takes from that line, take care, it's a desert out there. And what I learned is that take care, he specifically does it because it's caretaker, but reversed. Take care, caretake.
Yeah, got it.
And then it's a desert out there. And then when Mark Fisher passed on, Caretaker made an album called Take Care, It's a Desert Out There. As a honoring Mark Fisher and their symbiotic relationship. And we're going to play a little bit of that and then we'll come back with the interview. I think we're done here. And so enjoy the ambience. And we're back with Memory Disorder interview with the Caretaker from The Wire, 304 published in June of 2009. For those Yanks out there, The Wire is...
Not Wired.
Not Wired, yeah. We went over what The
Have
Wire was in the previous one.
Yeah, but I think I might have confused it with Wired.
I thought you did then as well.
Okay, well, for everyone...
I was like, it is not a tech
Okay.
antigrade.
The Wire is...
NME, but like a more alternative NME.
Alright, cool.
Yeah, it's just their Rolling Stones. For the Yanks out there, it's their Rolling Stones, but more cool.
Right. Well, that's what The Wire is. We've all learned something today.
Yeah, Marlowe messed it up last week. Alright, so it starts out, I have always been fascinated by memory and its recall, especially where sound is concerned. Writes James Kirby via email. And I thought this was funny because we were trying to figure out last week how Burial was conversing with Mark Fisher, and it seemed like he was in a vacuum. And here it's via email, but at times it seems like they're talking a bit more conversational. So it seemed confusing to me how this interview was conducted. Was it all through email?
Possibly.
And this is a couple of years after
yeah.
theoretically Pure Antigrade Amnesia comes out, and it seems like he comes out with a box set, and that's unclear as to what, which was based around the specific.
Box set is Tapa'a.
Yeah, theoretically Pure Antigrade Amnesia.
Yeah, they just call it a box set because it's really goddamn long and it comes in a box set.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've solved that mystery. Yeah, anyway, I mean, he talks in more detail about why it's called Tapa'a, which, I mean, we've covered. But yes, once again, it is the notion that because you can't form new memories, you have a sense of presence, and therefore cannot escape the past. That's why it's called it. And now he's going to explain that again, but now with Jameson.
Yep. And this is one of the things that you've said a lot, but it doesn't really matter.
It's not.
Mentions the Beckett landscape again, and that they're numbered and not named. And Kirby says it's black comedy. It's almost a joke that he's making this because he apparently has a reputation of a prankster, and he does all these kind of funny things with his labels, like
making a 72-song long ambient album.
Yes, very funny.
It's a hilarious and classical joke.
That we're all familiar with the premise of.
Yeah. Archaeologists think it is among the oldest jokes. The Pharaoh's Gesture first made a 72-song long ambient album.
And it's like, everybody's gonna get the joke.
We found the track listing in hieroglyph.
I think he recorded Lieutenant Pigeon's Moldy Old Dole as a joke, and I'm gonna bring that up while you say something.
Yes, that's such an obvious joke name for a musical project, considering the names of other British musical projects.
Well, it's a song. I don't know why it's a joke. He makes the joke just after it appeared on the cover of The Wire under the headline Harder, Faster, Louder. And I guess he butchered it. I think that's what it was.
Well, I mean, this is hilarious. The flute. The funniest thing. I mean, I suppose the funny thing is it appeared on the cover with the words
Harder, Faster, Louder.
Yeah, okay, that's a little funny, I guess.
And I think he released one like a cover of it, or like a.
Oh, this is the original?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, what's his version? I mean, Well, who's this then? What am I looking at?
That is Lieutenant Pigeon.
Okay.
And then...
Is that like Captain Beefheart's superior officer? Or basically, at this point, we're doing the snooker commentators from Mitchell and Webb.
Yes, a joke everyone gets.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to figure out this fucking joke of caretakers. Anyway, so that was a fun aside.
Okay, so now he gets into the Jameson.
The Jamson.
Because he talks about postmodern pastiche and how this is part of postmodern culture as an inability to focus on our own present, as though we have become incapable of achieving aesthetic representations of our own current experience.
Yeah, so, I mean, through this discussion and through the reading, I'm kind of gathering, Mark's general point is that Caretaker's work is sort of a presentation and plea against being stuck in the past while sort of shouting we're stuck in the past.
Yeah.
In an entry.
Like you're in the ballroom.
Yeah, so it's kind of the ever-present attempt to create the new in this world that Jameson's described so verbosely.
And then he talks about another project, The Death of the Rave, which I mentioned earlier. It kind of offsets against what Burial was talking about the rave. Like, both these artists seem to be linked in a lot of ways for Mark Fisher as being the two that are his favorite, that are hauntology, the music aesthetic. Yeah. And they both have the crackle. Rainy. They both evoke rain. They both have this idea of the rave that was this exuberant, like, optimism in the 90s that then crashed after 9/11. In an American sense, but like the true like end of the party was coming, crash down, and certainly 2008 also contributed to the end of the party. The well was drying up for capitalism in the former great empire of England, and the party was over. And what music better to soundtrack that party being over than dreary, ambient, and slightly more danceable, but equally as depressing,
74
drum and bass
songs,
art.
72 songs for the price of one album. Argue with your friends about which number is better than the other number. It's great.
Yeah, he says the tracks sound like they are being heard from outside a club, a horribly accurate sonic metaphor, perhaps, of our current state of exile from future shocking rate of innovation that dance music achieved in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and I thought that was a poignant critique that, innovation has slowed down, degenerated, almost become its own parody, I guess, at least in the 2000s. I can imagine it seeming stale to people who enjoyed greatly the drug-fueled mania of the...
Yeah, we should point out Mark Fisher could have been listening to MGMT at this time. This is a choice Mark Fisher is making.
Well, because we were listening to MGMT at this time.
It was fun. It was poppy.
But he wasn't, because that wasn't his vibe at the time.
It was not his vibe at all.
Nope. He probably hated MGMT, Marlowe.
Oh, God, did he almost certainly ever.
Or he could have been listening to Passion Pit, all the fun music of 2009. But the Caretaker talks about the raves and how he used to go and how it was amazing and how there were so many different genres and how it was like dance floors were like a life or death experience that ended in exaltation or whatever. A huge romanticization of what it means to go on a dance floor.
He wore an
lose
onion
yourself
on his belt, which was the style at the time.
And he says, I feel sorry these days for people when I go to clubs as the energy isn't there anymore. We have some so-called very cool clubs in Berlin, such as Watergate and Berghain, but you compare those to back in the late 80s and early 90s in Manchester, and it really is no comparison. As you said, like, Caretaker doesn't come across as, like, a very interesting interview, far less so than Burial, I thought.
Yeah, Burial stirred something in me.
Well, mockery was most of
Yeah, respect.
But this is,
What is this introducing new from the Burial chapter? Because we're kind of dancing around it, saying a lot of the same things in different ways. The anterograde amnesia is an interesting point, and he kind of gets into this, like, Mark Fisher thing that Mark Fisher likes to do, where he throws in a national diagnosis for society.
which is always great.
And so, yeah, let's throw anterograde amnesia in as one. Like Memento, it's a fresh reference. It's 2009. I mean, you saw it your freshman year at, like, your friend who was off campus.
If you're of a certain age.
Who lived off campus and, like, sold you weed. And you
Marlowe
saw it at his
speaking
house.
only about himself.
One time, like, your freshman year, or you saw it, like, from a kid in your dorm room who had, like, a Chris Nolan poster up, and, like, he had that, like, Reservoir Dogs poster with all the guys on it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
If you were Marlowe and listening to this podcast, then you would definitely have had that experience.
Yeah, anyway, and that's how you saw Memento for the first time.
This is your memory looking through the eyes of another memory.
Yeah, how about that? Anyway, so we're throwing that in there, and also it neatly then will lead us into The Shining. But in terms of, okay, so, I mean, there's a lot of similarities. There's the whole literal idea of the death of the rave. This is, like, the second time we've talked about that.
Yeah, Burial.
It's probably useful to...
A difference that I think you talk about is this is less British. And he gets into it that he moved to Berlin, but still keeps it...
Well, also, I mean, he talks about, like, oh yeah, I liked going to shows in Manchester in the 80s and 90s, but neither him nor Mark Fisher are going on this thing that Fisher has done and the artists have done through his representation of... And so this is the genealogy of, like, all the other musicians that came before them. That doesn't get mentioned here at all. With Goldie it definitely did, with Tricky it definitely did, with
Burial
definitely did. And, like, even in Burial's, like, whole, like, Britishness, it was generally a conversation in regards to the British music scene specifically, and, like, specific artists, not just it was nice going to clubs in Manchester in the 80s.
He does say that The Caretaker remains a project rooted in Britishness. Quote,
okay.
It's also only British music which has been used as source material. A parallel for The Caretaker's excavation of pre-rock British pop is Dennis Popper's musical drama, blah, blah, blah. So
I mean, source material in this case being what he's sampling, not, like, source material in the sense of his influences. But, yeah, sure.
I just wanted to bring that up as a counterpoint.
Fair enough.
That even though he moved to Berlin, he sees himself as doing a British project.
Yeah, and don't think they're making, again, all kind of the same sort of music. Like, I mean, we're not suddenly going into, so you do folk Americana, huh? Like, that's not a person being interviewed.
Well, this is, again, like...
If we had bluegrass Mark Fisher, I'm sure you'd hear a lot about fucking coal miners in Virginia.
Well, to get to that, he does talk about the miners' strike.
Yes, the Welsh miners' strike. Mm-hmm. The West Virginia of Britain.
But the other thing that is kind of setting up for the next article is The Shining. Mm-hmm. And he gets here that The name Caretaker was taken by the role that Jack Torrance is condemned to forever play in the haunted Overlook Hotel. Here's the line, "You've always been the caretaker." Torrance is told in one of the film's most chilling moments. The conceit was simple, inspired by the haunting sequences which featured the ballroom music, which is played only in Jack's mind. Kirby thought, why not make a whole album of material that might have been played in the Overlook? And that's his first...
The Overlook was a club in Manchester in the late 80s.
That's the thing, is he goes into this special record store that he discovers with all the...
he's sampling a bunch of ballroom music, and he bought a bunch of ballroom records, and takes pride in his... quote-unquote research he does for each of his musical projects, and it's an effort, it's a purposeful production. I'm not knocking
and the other thing is the temporality of the music. He notes is like between two wars kind of music, so it got lost in the post-war in a lot of different areas. Like because it's between both wars, between the 20s and 30s, that era is already, a lost. It's a lost world that is never going to come back. We're never going to have the conditions of the 1920s and 30s again. It's just not possible.
Right.
And so I've always been fascinated by that time period because so much that came after World War II was so radically different than the Depression and 20s. But at the same time, I think you can make the argument that the 90s into the crash of the 2000s were sort of like the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things are like things.
Yeah, I'm saying the way that they...
Yes. Yeah.
Like, if you're making a parallel and you're an artist in the 2009...
Yeah, anyway, that was the conceit of this project.
You're always looking back at the good times, which is in the 30s. You're looking back at the 20s because that's when before the crash, and in the 2000s you're looking back into the 90s as the good times because 2000s kind of sucked.
Yeah.
A funny aside about going into the record store. He has a solo project. He's also very anti-social media and Google. He doesn't trust the internet. It's very Gen X, like...
He's a very on person. He seems like he'd be a lot.
He doesn't trust the government. He doesn't trust these modern things. He takes the name of his grandfather. He's got a lot of things that he does.
Yeah, he's done a lot of projects. He's done things. He has a general hauntological thing that we've covered quite a lot.
Well, he kind of seems like somebody of a different age, in a certain way, and that's the thing that the record store guy says. You were born in the wrong era, as nobody's interested in this music who is your age.
Yeah, he tells this very self-congratulatory story about buying 78s in a record store and getting praise from the record store owner because this young handsome man is buying 78s,
which is something that happens to me on a daily basis.
I mean, yeah, whoever heard of
you look like
20-year-old in the 2000s buying 78s from a record store.
You look like you're from the 70s. Enjoyable. I mean, he talks about it a great deal. That's the essay. He talks about research. The guy does seem to put in an effort to make it.
Yeah. I don't know. He also is something of a sample artist, and he tries to be eclectic in his sample sources.
Eclectic, thorough, and he does seem like a collection. He seems to collect things, and seems to cherish.
Anyway, if this is another burial where this is a fucking world-shakingly famous guy that we're just talking about like this, sorry.
This is what you get when you get Yanks that are talking about British superstars over here.
Yeah, this is what you get. And also, I've never quite liked electronic music, but it's all fine.
Well, we're not gonna play that. We're gonna play out some Al Bowley.
All right.
And we'll see you next time when we're gonna talk everything The Shining.
Little kitten, I fell in love with you.